I still believe women. I still believe victims. Because this happened to me, it's not going to change that. But
if woke celebrities didn't have double standards, they wouldn't have any standards at all. Pop star Lizzo's downfall continues to get worse. A host of The View officially comes unhinged, and a socialist journalist makes a huge mistake and gets embarrassed online. All this and so much more is coming up on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where I take on the craziest ideas from across the internet, across our media, and across our politics, all from an independent perspective. Up first, like I mentioned, we've got to check in on Lizzo, the pop star and body positivity icon who's become quite controversial in recent times after facing a pretty serious lawsuit that she just spoke out about for the first time. The pop star just did an interview with Keke Palmer, who I hadn't heard of, but is apparently an actress or celebrity of some note in her own right, and she told Keke not to take it easy on her.
I know that you're not going to hold back. I know that you're going to keep it very real. Don't take it easy on me. I only want to do this interview once, and I feel like this was the best place to do it, so...
Spoiler alert. She did. Now, the context you need to know for this is that despite her years of activism as a progressive and woke celebrity, Lizzo was sued for some pretty problematic allegations by several of her employees and team members, including some of her former backup dancers. As Vox summarizes the lawsuit, it was filed by 3 of Lizzo's former dancers and alleges misconduct by her production company, Big Girl Big Touring Inc., and her dance team captain, Shirlene Quigley. Among the claims included in the suit is that Lizzo pressured dancers into unwanted sexual situations, made statements that were perceived as thinly veiled comments about a dancer's weight gain, and put people through grueling rehearsals that led to one dancer soiling herself. As of August 9, at least 6 more former employees have filed similar complaints. So the lawsuit rests upon some pretty serious claims about sexual harassment, and then ironically, because Lizzo is like the queen of fat positivity or whatever, body shaming, as well as a whole host of other things. And it's just a lawsuit, just allegations, hasn't been proven, and sitting here today, I don't know whether these allegations are true or false. And I'm a firm believer that everybody deserves the benefit of the doubt, even celebrities I don't particularly like or care for the ideas they've branded themselves around. And so Lizzo deserves that same presumption, even though, as you'll see, she hasn't always afforded it to others, and that's where some of the hypocrisy element of this story quickly comes in. But this interview that Lizzo did is really a masterpiece of just how to come off as totally disingenuous, a complete hypocrite, super out of touch, and just really do damage. I mean, whoever her PR person is that told her to do this or prepped her at all, fire that person, seriously. I mean, some of the arguments that she makes in defense of herself are just kind of irrelevant, like this bit.
These were people that I gave opportunities to. These were people that I liked them and appreciated them as dancers, respected them as dancers. So I was like, what? But then I heard all the other things like sexual harassment, and I was like, they're trying, well, I don't know what they're trying to do, but these are the types of things that the media can turn into something that it's not.
So there's a couple problems with this. One is that the fact that Lizzo gave these people opportunities, these dancers, isn't relevant. Harvey Weinstein gave people opportunities, okay? Just because you give someone an opportunity doesn't give you a pass on what happens next if you mistreat them, which again, we don't know if Lizzo did or didn't do, but it's just kind of an irrelevant deflection. And then what's funny about the bit where she says, well, they're just saying things they know the media will run with, is that Lizzo has joined pile-ons many times based on potentially not true allegations against people she doesn't like. But here's the part of the interview that really irked me, and I think is what's so harmful about this, and why it's actually really important. Take a listen to the claims Lizzo made next.
And you can ask me anything about it because I got dismissed from the case.
Yeah, that's a big weight off your shoulders, I'm sure.
Yes, and we're continuing to fight the other claims until they're all dismissed, and not dropped, dismissed, which means A judge saw this, and in the court of law, he looked at the evidence and said, okay, we can't allow this to go through because the evidence was evidencing against the claims.
Yeah.
So it is a big victory.
So basically everything she just said is either wrong, a lie, or both. None of the cases against Lizzo have been dismissed, and there are multiple cases. In one of the cases, a case where she's being sued by a former wardrobe stylist, Lizzo was dismissed as a defendant, but the case continues and her production company that Lizzo owns is still being sued. She was just dismissed as an individual party to the lawsuit. And this dismissal, most importantly, was not made because the evidence was evidencing against the claims. No, it was made on standing, a legal technicality. It didn't get into the evidence of whether the claims are true or false. And the other case that has made most of the headlines from the 3 former backup dancers against Lizzo hasn't been dismissed. So she's going out here with the I've been dismissed narrative. The evidence wasn't evidencing. You're lying, or you're just incredibly ill-informed about your own case and popping off and don't really know that what you're saying isn't accurate. Those are the only explanations. And it's really, I think, embarrassing, but also disgraceful to go out there and spew this kind of nonsense about such an important matter. And of course, Keke Palmer, because she decided to do this with like her friend, this hard-hitting interview, didn't fact check this, didn't challenge this, didn't push back. And in one sense, I don't blame her because she's not like a real journalist. But in another sense, that's why Lizzo should maybe have sat for an interview with a real journalist who could scrutinize some of this and fact check her and push back. But of course, why would she want to do that? She would implode because the claims she's making and the narrative she's spinning aren't true. But Lizzo insists that she did absolutely nothing wrong.
Well, and let's be clear, I did nothing wrong.
Yeah.
So I have no regrets, but I do have now this learned experience that is preparing me for the boss that I am becoming.
So as you heard there, Lizzo claims she did nothing wrong. And maybe that's true. I don't know. But what I do know is that Lizzo has been quite famously part of the Believe Women crowd, particularly Believe Women of color. I'll now read you guys my favorite Lizzo tweet. Retweet for Believe Black Women. Fave for Believe Black Women. Well, babe, the dancers suing you are all women of color. Are we supposed to believe them? Believe Black women unless they accuse me of wrongdoing is not what you tweeted. That's not the same, just doesn't quite have the same ring to it, I guess. And that's the big frustration I have about this case and about so many of these celebrity cases. It's not that I want anyone's career to be destroyed based on just accusations alone. I don't. That's not what I believe in. But it is what they believe in. So at some point, you can't have things both ways. You can't claim to be a believe all women champion, but just not when women accuse you of wrongdoing. Which is it? The math here is not mathing, and this is the kind of fraudulence and hypocrisy that makes people detest our elite class. And even worse than this, even worse than just not believing women anymore suddenly, she also tries to frame herself as a victim because she is a Black woman.
We got to remember that these claims are not just against me, but it was against
your whole production team,
my production team,
your captain,
the other people, and it really. They're all Black. We're all Black women.
Hear that, guys. Lizzo and her team are just being targeted because they're Black women by those Black women and women of color dancers who are suing her for sexual... What? You see how this just is like an NPC response for them at this point to just invoke their identities as a shield? We see this so much, and it's a kind of through line through a lot of these stories. The use of identity politics as a shield from accountability or scrutiny from bad behavior. Babe, you being a Black woman doesn't make you innocent, doesn't make you guilty, doesn't make you any more or less liable or responsible for these allegations. And America is over that. There was a little moment in 2020 or whatever. People felt really bad about George Floyd and other horrible things that happened where people were nodding along to a lot of this delulu. It's over. We've moved beyond it. We're done. Nobody's buying this. Your victim card has been declined. But maybe at least Lizzo has learned her lesson, right? And learned the importance of due process and the court of public opinion, and that we can't just blindly believe anyone, not women, not men, not they, thems, nobody, I especially don't believe they thems because they're delulu, but you can't just believe anyone, right? That's a ridiculous standard to have in society, culturally, legally, socially, whatever. No, she apparently still believes that, just not when it's applied to herself.
Because I also don't want to perpetuate the negative talk that's surrounding real victims in the world. I still believe women. I still believe victims. Because this happened to me, it's not going to change that. But people should not be able to just say anything about somebody and put it in the media and ask for money.
Oh, so she still believes all women, just not the ones that accuse her. Honestly, guys, and this is saying something when it comes to celebrity news. Like, I don't know I've ever seen such glaring cognitive dissonance and hypocrisy before. Like, this might be a new low. Now, here's this last bit where Lizzo explains how disheartening it was that people believed the women who accused her.
And then the betrayal from the public, where they were just like, well, we believe it. We've known you for 5 years and we've seen, how you stand up for, marginalized people and bigger bodies and Black women. But you know what? We don't believe you anymore. I was like, oh, okay.
Guys, so we didn't realize it because it wasn't in any of her past statements ever, but believe all women actually meant unless they accuse a proud POC who stands up for marginalized bodies. Yeah, no. I'm sorry, but at some point, if you live by a certain standard, you should also die by a certain standard, right? Like, you made your bed, now you should lay in it. So Lizzo has participated in too many cancellation campaigns to count, and now suddenly wants the benefit of the doubt when it comes to her own. I certainly think she should be afforded that doubt in every legal sense. I believe in the presumption of innocence, absolutely. But culturally and socially, I don't necessarily have any problem with her fans who she's encouraged to believe women, listen to victims, blah, 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 doing that applied to her. And if that hurts her career and hurts her image, as it really seems to have done, if that means her next album isn't as successful as some of her past work, then so be it. Because I'm not sure that this kind of toxic culture and behavior is ever really going to change unless these people who have for so long advocated these unrealistic and delusional standards are actually forced to live by them. And that's exactly what's happening to Lizzo. And frankly, her tears are delicious. That's my take. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below, and do hit that like button if you haven't yet. Make sure you're subscribed, by the way. I know a lot of you watch but aren't subscribed. And thank you for watching, but also side-eye. And do comment with your thoughts. I do take the time to read the comments and always love hearing what you guys have to say. So definitely write your take on the Lizzo situation below, and I'll read it and see what everyone thinks and has to say about that one. And now we got to check in on Sunny Hostin, because one of the hosts of The View just hit a new level of Delulu. Take a listen to what Sunny Hostin had to say about the anniversary of the January 6th riot at the Capitol.
I think we need to find moral clarity, in this country. And I just remember after January 6th, you had someone like Mitch McConnell placing the blame on January 6th where it belonged, squarely on Donald Trump's shoulders. And then you started seeing people backtrack that and losing their moral center. You had Condoleezza Rice, I believe, on this very show saying, we need to move on from January 6th. I say no. You don't move on, because January 6th was an atrocity. It was one of the worst moments in American history. And when you think about the worst moments in American history, like World War II, things that happened, like the Holocaust, chattel slavery, we need to never forget, because past becomes prologue if you forget any race.
Did she just suggest that the Holocaust was American history? I mean, kind of. America wasn't involved, but it's European history more so, but okay, that's not really the point. So I just wish we could acknowledge that January 6th was bad, embarrassing, and a disgrace without taking it to like delusional levels of alarmism, comparing it to 9/11, the Holocaust, and all that, things where thousands or actually millions of people died and were exterminated. Like, that's a little bit of a stretch, does make you sound hysterical and ridiculous, and I think discredits the legitimate concerns and complaints that people have about the riot. As the journalist Robbie Suave posted on Twitter, January 6th was an embarrassing spectacle and rioters should be punished appropriately. It was not on the same level as World War II, slavery, or the Holocaust, which is obvious to everyone whose brain is still intact. I completely agree with this. I actually take issue with a lot of the Republicans who now act like January 6th was no big deal. No, it was a violent riot. Dozens of police officers were injured, and a lot of criminal activity took place that day. A bunch of people protesting for a cause that was based on a lie. The 2020 election wasn't stolen. And then they threw a fit, an un-American fit, and used violence and criminal offenses to try to get their message across. That's wrong. It's wrong when Black Lives Matter did it in 2020 and they rioted, and it's wrong when fringe MAGA supporters did it on January 6th. But the only person who was actually killed as a direct result of that was one of the MAGA protesters. And a riot that led to one death is just not comparable to the Holocaust, to 9/11, or to any of these atrocities. I just think we have this epidemic of hysterical comparisons and delusion and alarmism, especially in the media, because it is a good way to make headlines or draw attention to yourself, but it really does far more harm to the discourse than good, especially in cases like this, where some of these comparisons are actually offensive and ridiculous, like the comparison to the Holocaust. Commentator Hen Mazig pointed out on Twitter, comparing January 6th to the Holocaust is beyond absurd. It's offensive, it's dangerous. The Holocaust was the systematic extermination of 6 million Jews, children, parents, and entire families wiped out in gas chambers, ghettos, and mass shootings. Comparing that to a political riot diminishes the unimaginable horror of genocide. We have a responsibility to honor the memory of Holocaust victims, not downplay their suffering with careless rhetoric. This kind of comparison is not just ignorant, it erodes our understanding of history and cheapens our memory of atrocities. Words matter. I agree with this. Words do matter. And whether it's mainstream media figures or Democratic politicians, the hysterical rhetoric about January 6th and about the Capitol riot is not helpful. In fact, it makes it easy for people to discredit the whole opposition to it, all the critiques of it, as just Trump derangement syndrome, when actually it was a deeply disgraceful day and an embarrassment to the country, and something that Republicans, the ones who enabled it or encouraged it, should be embarrassed of. You're almost letting them off the hook when you go so unhinged like this. They can dismiss you out of hand. That's why, to me, this clip is just everything that's wrong with liberal cable news. But what do you guys think? Do you agree with Sunny Hostin? Do you agree with me? Let me know in the comments section, and do hit that like button while you're at it, and make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet. And now we got to check in on the magazine Jacobin, because a socialist journalist just accidentally humiliated himself. So Jacobin is this publication. It's a magazine. It's openly socialist, extreme far left economic ideas, Marxist, all of that. I follow them. Of course, I deeply disagree with almost everything they believe, but I follow them and I keep up with their content a little bit. And they just published yet another article attacking capitalism and trashing capitalism. But this article had one problem that is kind of ridiculous, to the point that it calls the whole enterprise into question, really. This article was tweeted out by Jacobin with this quote: "Capitalism purports to offer endless abundance, but delivers housing shortages, overflowing dumpsters, and jobs we all hate." This should be your first red flag, because there are plenty of legitimate critiques of capitalism. It's not a perfect system. No system is. It's just far better than all the rest, in my opinion. But blaming the housing shortage on capitalism is strange, because the main culprit of the housing shortage is the massive restrictions on the supply of housing that are in place in many states and localities across this country that restrict the supply. So then when there's a lot of demand, prices go up. But that's not unfettered capitalism and free markets. That's the heavy hand of government restricting the market and leading to distorted outcomes and higher rents than you would otherwise have. So to blame that on capitalism, we're not doing great from the get-go. But here's the error they made in this article that's just one of the craziest journalistic errors I've seen in some time, and I see a lot of them on Twitter. The author of this article, Devin Thomas O'Shea, wrote, "Take Blackstone, which owns a third of U.S. housing stock. They can create scarcity and set prices." So this is a narrative that you hear a lot from kind of socialist progressive types. Oh, the corporations are buying up all the housing and jacking up rents, and that's why rent is so expensive, and that's why housing prices are so expensive. It's one of their explanations for this problem that I think is basically not real. It's basically an invented boogeyman. But this person claimed that Blackstone, one of the corporations that you'll hear cited as one of the ones buying up all the housing, owns a third of U.S. housing stock, so U.S. homes. Excuse me? 1 in 3. Their claim is that Blackstone owns 1 in 3 houses in America. So much so that they can create scarcity and set prices. Also, even if they did own a third of housing, I'm not sure that would be enough for them to be able to set prices or create scarcity. But set that aside for a second. They don't. That's actually insane. Imagine what that would mean, right? That would mean that you walk down your street and 1 in 3 houses is actually owned by Blackstone and rented out by corporate overlords to people. No, actually, most homes are owned by individuals who own their own homes. As the community note appended to this article explained, Blackstone is the 3rd largest homeowner in the United States with 62,000 houses in their portfolio. But the U.S. has approximately 145 million homes total. Blackstone owns less than 0.05% of this. So they were only off by a little bit, right? Now, mistakes do happen when you're writing articles, but or you're doing journalism in general, but a mistake that big is, one, a red flag that the author would put some information like that, not hyperlinked, not sourced, was that not fact-checked? And also, too, that, like, does this author really know what they're talking about if they could have such a profound misconception about the housing market and you're writing an article in part about that? Like, that's a red flag. But more importantly, the editorial process. Who are the editors at this magazine? And how did they not catch that as an obviously untrue and weird statement? Clearly, they've got a massive hive mind echo chamber here that's totally out of touch with reality. But if this was the only piece of this story, I probably wouldn't be covering it. Just Socialist magazine fails again. Yeah, we're used to that, babe. We're used to that. What was so disturbing, honestly, on kind of a profound level to me as a recovering journalist, was the way the author responded online after this mistake was pointed out to him. Somebody tweeted a screenshot of the article and tagged the author, Devin Thomas O'Shea, and said, "Are you stupid? Blackstone does not own a third of U.S. housing stock. How could you possibly write that? You need to fix this and issue a correction." So, kind of hostile, kind of rude, but he is right. This does demand a correction, which, by the way, Jacobin did eventually do. But here's how the author responded. "Sorry, King, you're so right. I'll commit Sudoku for besmirching the good name of Blackstone." I think he meant seppuku, which is a form of like honor suicide in ancient Japanese culture. But like, I think that's what he meant. And he said Sudoku, the like word game or number game. I don't know. I don't think I've actually played it, but that's slightly embarrassing. But also, yeah, is that a professional response from a journalist when somebody points out a massive error you made? "Sorry, King, my bad for besmirching the name of Blackstone." Yeah, you lied. You published an article entirely based on a false premise, misled your readers, and yes, did totally besmirch this company, which I know you hate companies, but that should still matter to a journalist, to be at least somewhat tethered to facts. But they don't care. They actually don't care, as the rest of this exchange made clear. The person who originally pointed out the error said, "This isn't about besmirching anyone's good name. It's about giving your readers a fundamental misunderstanding of how the world works. This isn't some tiny error. It's like telling your readers that the sky is red or that diamonds are soft." To which Devin Thomas O'Shea replied, "Most people intuitively understand that private equity affects the way the world works in a bad way, especially when it comes to housing." Huh? So his response is basically that, whatever, this massive error is no big deal because the vibes of my story basically ring true to people and it's my truth, even if it's not the truth. Like, no, absolutely not. get a new career, get a new job, seek help, because this is not journalism. The journalism is not journalisming here, babe. You're delusional, deranged, an activist for fringe ideas, but you are not a journalist, and you're not doing any form of journalism when you openly make massive factual errors and then say, well, it's fine. The vibes are right anyway. And also, screw that company I lied about. They're a bad company, so it's fine to publish false information about them. No, that's not how journalism works, and you should resign from your job. But more importantly, it's not even true that, well, the vibes about this are correct. No, the whole narrative is not true. I'll put graphs on screen here, but corporate landlords own only a tiny percent and are buying only a tiny sliver of US homes. And as a share of overall ownership of single-family housing stock, Blackstone owns about 0.06%, and all other institutionally owned single-family rental properties combined account for about 0.5%. So the whole thing, the whole narrative, the whole my truth that this journalist says, well, the vibes are correct, is actually wrong. It's actually propaganda. It's a narrative not based in fact, because corporate ownership of housing is still just a tiny, tiny sliver, nowhere near enough to be setting prices or price gouging people or controlling the whole market. It's not a thing. It's a socialist boogeyman. It's something they've made up or invented. And so for the journalist here to cite that as some sort of justification for his factual error, his huge factual error, is just disgraceful. But to me, it's kind of a microcosm of everything that's wrong with progressive thinking. I'm reminded of the time that AOC famously said, well, we might not have been factually correct, but we were morally correct. No, actually, if you're not factually correct, you can't be morally correct. At least not in a way that's relevant at all to our reality we live in. I don't know, guys. I wish I could say I was surprised to see this from a journalistic institution these days or from the kind of socialist left, but I'm not. This is sadly kind of par for the course, honestly. But what do you guys think? Are you loyal Jacobin readers, or is this your first encounter with this interesting bunch? Do let me know in the comments, and do hit that like button while you're at it. All right, guys, that's it for this episode of the Brad versus Everyone podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining me, and we'll talk again tomorrow.